Hello and welcome to the Energy Connect studio at ADIPEC 2023. I'm delighted to have sitting once again with me in the studio Ben Cahill, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Ben, so good to see you again.
Good to see you, Julian.
Now, what's your view on President Biden's so-called war on fossil fuel and what's going on in the States?
Well, there's been a lot of dialogue about this in the last couple of years. If we think back to the last 4 years of the oil and gas industry in the United States, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride with COVID and the recovery from COVID. And we saw a peak in U.S. oil and gas production in late 2019, and then a steep drop like everywhere else around the world in 2020. And since then, oil and gas production in the U.S. has recovered, but it's been a slower, more gradual rate because the industry is still in this period of capital discipline. But there's a lot of polarization about just about everything in the United States these days, including the energy sector. And so there's been a lot of criticism of the Biden administration for not placing enough emphasis on continued investment in oil and gas production. This idea that the messages coming from the White House are really discouraging investment in oil and gas. And a lot of people say there's a war on fossil fuels. Personally, I don't think the facts bear that out. I do think that they've discounted the importance of continuing to invest in oil and gas, leasing and permitting on public lands. But to me, the reality is, the industry has found a winning formula with investors. Capital discipline works. They want to maintain that capital discipline. That's why we've downshifted to this slower, more sustainable rate of growth. And I don't think it's so much the messages from the White House.
Looming next year is obviously the election in the US. How will energy play out, do you think, then, in the coming months? You said it's polarized different parties in America. Let's get your thoughts on that.
Well, we have a long way to go until Election Day, but these things start early in the US. The oil and gas industry is a frequent, refrain among the Republican candidates. Yeah. Again, there's a lot of allegations that the White House has depressed investment in oil and gas. We have this huge strategic leverage and importance in the market, and we're not taking advantage of it. And to some extent, that's definitely understandable. I do think for the first couple of years, the Biden administration took the oil and gas industry for granted. And it continues to probably maybe underplay the importance of continued investment over the medium to long term. I think another real open question is what happens with the energy transition. And of course, in the United States, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, two other major federal climate policies. These have had a huge impact on investment in low-carbon energy. There's been something like $110 billion announced in clean energy investments in the U.S. since the Inflation Reduction Act passed. So companies are responding to these big tax incentives, and yet there's a lot of political division over this. And so I think slowly the politics of climate are changing in the United States. But on the Republican side, a lot of people are saying, well, the IRA is just too expensive. It's too costly. We're betting on a lot of industries. It's industrial policy. The track record of industrial policy is not great. People think it's misguided. So it will be very much a topic of debate.
Absolutely. And we're here at ADIPEC where the theme is, decarbonizing fast and together. What's your viewpoint on the need for, methane reduction? But also, what's the current policy out there in the US or the EU on methane reduction and what's needed to be done? And are you involved in anything around this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about methane so far at ADIPEC. I think a lot of people recognize that if you're looking for a near-term lever to really have an impact on the pace of global warming, cutting methane emissions in the oil and gas industry is a really critical way to do that. And so the industry's stepped up in a really positive way, I think. Especially the big oil and gas companies, the publicly listed companies, the majors, they have pretty ambitious methane reduction plans. They're under a lot of pressure from investors and shareholders to do this. And so that's quite positive, and it's a big focus of debate. On the regulatory side, both in the United States and the European Union, we have methane legislation underway. It's taking different forms on both sides of the Atlantic, but there's, I think, a pretty strong transatlantic cooperation to try to reduce methane emissions. And part of that is about looking at methane associated with global gas and LNG supply chains, and that's something that I've been working on myself.
Oh, great. And tell me more about what you've been working on then.
I think a big question is how do we get a better handle on all the methane emissions associated with natural gas and LNG supply chains? So from production to gathering and boosting to transportation to liquefaction and to shipping. The reality is that understanding the emissions intensity of gas at all of these different links in the supply chain is quite complicated. And we're still in a pretty early stage of trying to wrap our heads around all the data challenges. But when you join up all those links in the value chain, that gets even more challenging. And so there's a big effort by policymakers to try to come up with systems to track the emissions intensity of gas across global gas supply chains. And you're seeing some interesting cooperative efforts between consuming and producing countries to do this. I think it's going to be on the agenda at COP28. There's a big focus on trying to speak with companies like ADNOC and the big Gulf national oil companies and the big consumers in Asia, and try to rally the industry and NGOs and others together to say, we know this is important, let's talk about developing the data systems to do this better. And that's the effort that I'm involved in, trying to provide some kind of technical input and the modeling expertise to help make it happen.
All the best for that, and maybe see you at COP28 then.
I hope so. Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone for watching, and I look forward to bringing more studio interviews from the show floor in the coming days.